It was late at night, and Maya was at the train station. She had missed the last regular train and was waiting for the midnight train. The platform was empty, except for a flickering streetlight and the sound of the wind. Suddenly, an announcement crackled over the speakers. The midnight train is arriving. Please step back from the platform. Maya shivered. The voice sounded strange almost, hollow. She looked down the tracks and saw the train approaching. Its headlights barely lit the tracks ahead, and it moved silently without the usual screech of wheels. As the train stopped, its doors opened with a soft hiss. Maya hesitated but stepped inside. The train car was dimly lit, and the air felt cold. She noticed the passengers. They were all silent, sitting perfectly still and dressed in old-fashioned clothes. Maya sat in the corner and tried not to look at them. She whispered to herself, "Just a train ride home. Nothing to worry about." The train started moving, but instead of speeding up, it crept forward slowly. Maya glanced at the window. The outside world was pitch black, as if the train wasn't moving through a city but a void. Suddenly, Maya heard faint whispers. She looked around, but the passengers remained silent, their faces hidden in shadows. The whispers grew louder, and she realized they were coming from behind her seat. "Help us! Save us!" Maya turned around, but no one was there. Her heart pounded. She stood up and walked toward the next car, hoping to find the conductor or someone who could explain what was happening. The next car was empty, except for the conductor. He stood at the far end, his back to her. Maya called out, "Excuse me, what's going on? Where is this train going?" The conductor turned slowly. His face was pale, and his eyes were hollow, glowing faintly in the dark. He spoke in a voice that made Maya's blood run cold. "This train doesn't go home. It collects lost souls." Maya stepped back, her breath quickening. "I'm not supposed to be here," she shouted. The conductor tilted his head. "Are you sure?" he asked. He pointed at a seat near the window. There was a photograph lying there. Maya picked it up and froze. It was a picture of her, taken that very night, standing on the platform. Maya's mind raced. "No, this can't be real," she whispered. The whispers returned, louder this time. "You were warned. You didn't listen. Stay with us." She remembered crossing the tracks earlier that night, rushing to catch the train. She hadn't seen the lights, hadn't heard the horn. Tears filled her eyes as she looked back at the conductor. He nodded solemnly. "This is the last train for the lost. Welcome aboard." Maya tried to scream, but no sound came out. The train continued into the darkness, and the passengers turned to look at her for the first time. Their faces were pale, their eyes empty, just like the conductor's. The whispers surrounded her. "Now, you're one of us." The train vanished into the night, leaving no trace behind. Moral of the story: some chances are one time, and some warnings shouldn't be ignored.
On a cold, foggy October evening, Mia was helping her grandmother clean out the attic. In the corner, hidden beneath a dusty old sheet, she found an antique mirror. Its golden frame was etched with strange, twisted symbols that seemed to shimmer under the dim light. "This used to belong to my sister," her grandmother said with a shaky voice. "She didn't like it much." Mia felt a chill run down her spine but shrugged it off. Intrigued, she brought the mirror to her room, thinking it would be a unique decoration. That night, as Mia lay in bed scrolling on her phone, she noticed something odd. In the moonlight, her reflection in the mirror seemed wrong. The room was still, but her reflection twitched ever so slightly. She blinked. Her reflection didn't. Mia gasped and turned on the bedside lamp. The reflection moved normally again, but the air in the room felt heavy. She dismissed it as tiredness and pulled the covers over her head. At midnight, Mia woke to a soft scratching sound. She sat up, her heart pounding. The noise was coming from the mirror. "Just the house settling," she whispered to herself. But then she heard it, a faint, raspy whisper. "Mia, look closer." Her blood froze. The whisper wasn't coming from the room. It was coming from the mirror. Summoning all her courage, she stepped closer and peered into the glass. At first, all she saw was her pale reflection. But then, a shadowy figure appeared behind her. Its face was obscured, but its glowing, hollow eyes burned into hers. She spun around. The room was empty. The next morning, Mia told her best friend, Lily, about the strange events. "Burn the mirror," Lily said immediately. "That's not something you mess with." Mia laughed nervously. "It's just an old mirror. Maybe I imagined it." But deep down, she wasn't so sure. That evening, she tried to ignore the mirror. She covered it with a blanket and focused on her homework. But as she turned off her light to sleep, she saw something horrifying. The blanket over the mirror moved, as if something underneath was trying to push its way out. Her chest tightened. She didn't dare move. The blanket fell to the floor on its own, revealing the mirror. There, etched into the glass, were the words, "You can't hide." Mia confronted her grandmother the next day. "What's wrong with the mirror?" she demanded. Her grandmother hesitated, then sighed. "That mirror belonged to my sister, Evelyn. She always said it showed her things, terrible things. She tried to get rid of it, but it always came back." "What happened to Evelyn?" Mia asked. Her grandmother's eyes filled with tears. "One night, we heard her screaming. When we rushed in, she was gone. The only thing left was the mirror. We never found her." Mia's heart pounded. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I didn't think it would awaken again," her grandmother said weakly. That night, Mia couldn't sleep. The mirror loomed in the darkness like a hungry beast. The whispers started again, louder this time. "Mia, let me out." Shaking, Mia approached the mirror. The shadow was there, clearer than before. It wasn't just a figure now. It had a face, twisted and grotesque, with a wide, gaping mouth that stretched too far. "Release me," it growled. "What do you want?" Mia cried. The mirror rattled violently, and the shadow pressed its hands against the glass as if trying to break through. Cracks began to spread across the surface. Suddenly, a freezing wind swept through the room, and the lights flickered. The shadow screamed, a sound that pierced Mia's ears. Then everything went silent. Mia decided to destroy the mirror. She grabbed a hammer and struck it with all her strength. The glass shattered into countless shards. But as the pieces fell, something dark spilled out. Thick, black smoke that filled the room. From the smoke emerged a figure, tall and skeletal, with glowing red eyes and long, clawed fingers. "You freed me," it hissed, its voice dripping with malice. Mia tried to run, but the figure was faster. It grabbed her arm with an icy grip. "You took my place," it whispered. The next morning, Mia's grandmother found her room empty. The mirror was whole again, sitting silently against the wall. When she looked into it, she screamed. Inside the glass, Mia's terrified face stared back, banging on the other side of the mirror, her mouth open in a silent scream. From the reflection, the shadow smiled. It had found a new home.
It was a stormy evening when James received the letter. He sat by the fire reading the day's newspaper when a loud knock echoed through his front door. He opened it to find a thick, old envelope lying on the doorstep, no return address or name on it. Inside was a single, chilling line of text. "Come to Blackthorn Manor. Find the truth before it's too late." James had heard of Blackthorn Manor, a massive, decaying mansion at the edge of town. Everyone knew the place was cursed, empty for decades, with rumors of strange happenings and a tragic history. The manor had been the home of the Blackthorn family, but after the mysterious death of its last heir, Lucinda Blackthorn, it was abandoned. Some said the house was alive, watching, waiting for the next soul to wander in. James didn't believe in ghosts, but the letter intrigued him. He knew the stories, but as a local journalist, he was always looking for a good story. Maybe there was something to uncover, a forgotten truth behind the rumors. James knew he couldn't go alone, so he reached out to two of his close friends, Sarah and Mark, both of whom had an interest in local history and mysteries. They agreed to join him, though Sarah was reluctant. "This isn't a simple abandoned house, James," she warned. "People have disappeared. I don't think it's worth the risk." Mark, more adventurous, was the first to agree. "Come on, it'll be an adventure. Besides, we'll stick together. Nothing will happen." But even Mark, usually fearless, couldn't hide the tension in his voice when they made plans to visit that very night. They agreed to meet at James' place, and from there they would drive to Blackthorn Manor. As they drove through the winding, empty roads, the atmosphere grew heavier. The trees that lined the way seemed to close in, their branches swaying unnaturally in the wind, casting long shadows across the road. The mansion loomed in the distance, barely visible in the fog that had settled like a blanket. "Just get us there safely, James," Sarah said, her voice tense. "I don't know about this." James didn't respond. He could feel the weight of the silence around them, the eerie feeling that something wasn't right. They arrived at Blackthorn Manor, the towering structure casting a long shadow over the surrounding landscape. The mansion stood as if it were alive, its dark windows staring down at them like eyes. "This is where it all ends," Mark joked, but his nervous laugh didn't hide his unease. The group stood at the front door, which creaked loudly as James pushed it open. A blast of cold air hit them as they entered, and the smell of decay filled their noses. The air was thick, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting. The front hall was dark, with only the dim light from their flashlights cutting through the gloom. "All right, let's make this quick," Sarah muttered, her eyes darting around. "We're just here for answers, right?" James nodded, but something about the house felt wrong, unnervingly wrong. The wooden floorboards groaned under their feet, the air colder than it should be. Shadows seemed to move just out of the corner of their eyes, and every creak and groan of the house made the hairs on the back of their necks stand on end. "Let's split up," James suggested, trying to sound confident. "We'll cover more ground this way." "I don't like this idea," Sarah said immediately, her voice sharp. "I really don't." Mark, already moving forward, waved her off. "It'll be fine. I'll stick with Sarah. You go upstairs." James made his way up the grand staircase, the banister cold beneath his fingers. As he reached the top, he heard a soft whisper, like a voice carried on the wind. "Leave now," it said, the sound faint but distinct. He paused, his breath catching in his chest. "What was that?" he muttered to himself, turning quickly to look around. But there was nothing. The house felt like it was closing in on him. The silence grew heavier with each step he took, the weight of something unseen pressing against him. He turned the corner into a long, dark hallway lined with faded portraits of the Blackthorn family. Their eyes followed him as he walked, and the feeling of being watched intensified. "Just the house settling," James whispered, trying to calm himself. But the whisper came again, louder this time, echoing through the hallway. "Go back. It's too late." At the same moment, upstairs, James heard a door slam behind him. He turned around, heart pounding, but saw nothing. The whispers were louder now, echoing in his ears. "You shouldn't have come, James. You are part of us now." The air turned ice cold, and James felt the walls closing in on him. His flashlight flickered and went out. He reached for his phone, but it was dead. Panic began to set in. He sprinted down the hallway, but every direction seemed to lead him back to the same spot, like the house itself was shifting. Down in the basement, Mark and Sarah were frozen in terror, staring at the face in the mirror. The glass began to distort, and a hand, pale and bony, reached out from the surface. "Get out now!" Sarah screamed, but it was too late. The door slammed shut, trapping them in the basement. The house was alive, and it was not going to let them leave. The next morning, the police arrived to investigate the missing persons report. They found the front door wide open, the house silent. Inside, the rooms were empty, except for a single broken mirror in the basement. James, Sarah, and Mark were never found. The house still stands, waiting for its next visitors. The people of the village know better than to approach it. Sometimes, when the wind is just right, you can hear faint whispers, warning anyone who dares to listen. The house is watching. The curse is alive, and it will claim whoever steps inside.